Hey everyone, and welcome back to another King Arthur Legends Rise video. So in today's video, guys, we are going to be discussing Morgan, which isn't very exciting on the surface. However, I do have all three relics for Morgan. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of create a video talking about which relics are best on Morgan and where to use Morgan in those settings. So I don't believe that she has one best relic. I will say, however, she does have a most used relic, which is her fire relic, and we will talk about that. So if you're wondering which relic to use the most on Morgan, it's most likely going to be the fire one, but I think the frost relic and the storm relic do outclass the fire relic in a couple different instances. So I did want to kind of talk about them a little bit. I also want to mention that Morgan's usefulness really unlocks whenever you have this Chivalry 3 unlocked. The reason being is this skill or passive 3 will activate on any ability, where if you don't have her Chivalry 3, it's only on her skill 1. And while Morgan's skill 1 is okay, you rarely ever want to use it. So you really need to have this Chivalry 3 unlocked to even maximize her relics as well. So I did want to mention that. So let's now discuss each individual relic. Oh, sorry. One more thing about the passives. So quick reference, her first passive really has nothing to do with any of her relics. Her second passive, however, does, because it pertains to the skill 2. So anytime you use her skill 2, it's on a 2-turn cooldown if you have it fully skilled up, which you should 100% max this. If you use her skill 2, she has the ability to decrease the enemy's attack gauge by 40%. That's amazing. And then she also has the ability to remove 2 buffs from each enemy. Okay, now with that being said, let's talk. So her first skill on all of her relics, I believe, are exactly the same. So she has a chance to sleep somebody at a 50% chance clip here. Also, if you skill this up, it's the same thing, 50% chance. And then here, 50% chance. So this does not change. That's sleep for, oh yeah, it can be up to 2 turns as well. So that doesn't change at all. The sleep can be important for specific, levels of hard, forbidden dungeon, even in arena. So this is, like I said, a solid, skill 1 ability. 50% chance is a pretty decent clip. And she's always going to be built with high accuracy, effect accuracy. So it's just going to come down to a 50-50 flip most of the time. So now let's talk about the skill 2. Remember, the skill 2 also coordinates with the passive 2 for Morgan. So on the skill 2 of the fire relic, she attacks an enemy 3 times, and she has a 60% chance, well, actually 50%, but it can be booked up to 70% chance to decrease the target's attack by 10% with every attack. So what that means is if you have her passive ability, if you have her second passive ability fully upgraded and it's off cooldown, you have the ability to potentially reduce the enemy's attack gauge by 75%. So you'll reduce it by 45% automatically with her passive, and then each hit has a percentage chance to reduce it by 10% each time. So each individual hit of 3, so a maximum of 30% can be reduced. This is a huge deal. I've talked about this in the video with her and Sergius in the Fire Relic, which is what makes her such a deadly combo with him, is the fact that she will always reduce people's attack gauge at least by the 45% mark, because Sergius has the ability to keep looping back around to her turn before the enemy gets to go. Now, sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes your Sergius or her aren't fast enough, and that's why maybe that combo isn't working out as well for most of you guys. But this Relic is the key piece to that. So this is an extremely strong skill 2. So the skill 2 on her Frost Relic is also a triple hitter, but her second hit on the triple hitter has the ability to remove a buff. You can boost this up to 50%, and you can actually have this remove up to 2 buffs instead of 1. And then on your third hit on this same skill, you have a potential to boost this up to 90% chance to inflict damage taken increase 2 for 3 turns, which is a long time. So on this one skill, you have the ability, if it's fully booked out, you have a 50% chance to remove 2 buffs and a 90% chance to inflict damage taken increase 2 for 3 turns, on top of pairing it with that skill 2, passive 2, while also removing 2 additional buffs from each enemy and reducing the attack gauge. So the thing that I like about the Frost Relic is it adds so much more potential than what the Fire Relic does. So the Fire Relic is amazing at one thing, which is reducing attack gauge. If you want someone to just go in there and never have your opponent get a turn, Morgan in her Fire Relic is amazing. Now, Morgan in her Frost Relic for her second skill has a bunch of different things. You can take down tank teams. You can remove buffs from pesky Anyas. I think it's also a nice fail-safe for someone for some kind of dungeon like the Nest of Jeskelheg, which is where I use this a lot too. But we'll talk about all of the individual dungeons on where best to use these relics. But this, I think, just you have the ability to add 2 new skills to go along with the passive 2 on Morgan, which is the damage taken increase 2 and the buff removal to go along with the attack gauge decrease on the passive 2. So this is a really great second skill on her Frost Relic. Now, her Storm Relic also has a really good second skill, which is a 2-hitter. Now, that's a little bit worse because if you want to use her in like Penveed or something like that where, the amount of hits matters, that is something that you need to pay attention to. But if this is fully skilled up, you have a 70% chance to inflict defense decrease for 2 turns. And this is each hit. So if you have this fully leveled up, you have the ability to put it's a 70% chance on each hit to inflict defense decrease 2 for 2 turns. So you can get 2 of those debuffs on one person because unlike most games, in this game, the debuffs actually stack. So I can't remember what the decrease rate is. We'll go in and we'll check it real quick after we go, but it times it by 2, which cannot be understated. Now this, I think, is similar to the Fire Relic, where if you really need someone to land the defense decrease 2 on some kind of enemy, specifically like Aldry and Frozen Plain, this is really, really key. The thing I will mention, though, is unless this is booked, at least that number of defense decrease turns +1, I think it's a little lackluster. I think you really need to get that second turn to maximize the potential of this relic. All right, so that's the skill 2. Now the skill 3, which I think is rarely used just because the second passive of Morgan is so strong, you won't see the skill 3 used as often. However, I do think it does have some application. So the third skill for her Fire Relic is a double hitter with a decent percent multiplier. Like 230% attack, I think is okay, especially for a control hero. And then if this is fully leveled up, you have a 100% chance to have the damage taken increase to land for 2 turns. So that's pretty strong, similar to the Frost Relic. However, the Frost Relic is a 3-turn ability. However, not a 100% chance, but it only takes 2 Vigor on the skill 2. And then it also has the ability on this skill 3 for the Fire Relic to have a 70% chance for the last hit to inflict recovery disruption for 1 turn. Now, I think this was meant to be used on the Keepsake dungeon because that boss does have some recovery. However, because he does not have attack gauge reduction immunity, you're always just spamming the skill 2 on the Fire Relic anyway, and you don't really need recovery disruption. The only other time recovery disruption is ever used is in Aldry or Frozen Plain, but because Morgan is a weak element there, you're really not bringing her in her Fire Relic unless you're on the lower stages and you're just trying to farm some of that stuff to progress your account. However, there's plenty of other people in the game that do recovery disruption way better, which is why I don't think the skill 3 on her Fire Relic is worth mentioning, because this debuff you get from her 3rd passive anyway, and if you're using the Fire Relic, you're just spamming that skill 2. All right, so now let's check out the Frost Relic skill 3. So she has a 100% chance to charge one ally's attack gauge by 50%. However, you can boost this up to 70%, which is really, really strong. On top of that, you're granting that same ally attack increase 2, and you can boost that up to 2 turns instead of 1 if you get the last skill fully maxed out. And you are also putting a shield on that person up to 12%, again, if you fully max this out, and it's for 3 turns. This is such a cool, unique skill on this Frost Relic in comparison to the Fire Relic for sure, and the Storm Relic. This is the thing that I like about Morgan so much, is her passives are so good, and then she has such a wide variety of modes that you can utilize if you have all of her relics. So this turns into an amazing skill in PvP. Boosting attack gauge by 70%. I think this is the largest single target alongside Jack, which we've mentioned a couple times. Jack has it on his passive too, so there is a cooldown. This does not have a cooldown as long as you have the Vigor. And both of these buffs are pretty good. The shield, I think, is, whatever. It can help with some survivability because most of the time you're using this ability on your damage dealers, which tend to be a little squishier. So this could, make or break your hero surviving. Let's say if you're targeting an Anya and she's counterattacking. So I don't think it's something that's not important. However, I don't think it's as important as the first 2 abilities. So this really allows one of your slower damage dealers to get a large boost, to give them enough damage to take out a full team without having the speed involved to try and go next. So this is a great skill 3. I really like the Frost Relic for this ability. And then the Storm Relic kind of takes a whole different approach. So this is a double hitter where your first hit has the ability to inflict recovery disruption for 2 turns. And that's if it's fully booked. And then you have a 60% chance then for the second hit to inflict sleep for 2 turns. This is really strong. So an AoE ability to inflict abnormal status for 2 turns is extremely potent in PvP. This is also very good in Forbidden Dungeon. A lot of people utilize Merlin. People will use Merlin for his skill 3 to inflict freeze. Freeze tends to be, I think, a little bit better than sleep, just because if you you can't hit the person again with sleep or they will wake up. Whereas freeze, you can continue to attack the person and nothing happens. But Merlin only has a 1-turn freeze, whereas Morgan in her Storm Relic has a 2-turn sleep. So if you bring a lot of single target abilities, the sleep can be just a really, really huge ability. On top of that, if you pair Morgan with somebody like, a Gillian, who has a single target attack gauge reduction ability, I think that 2-turn sleep turns into a much more important abnormal status just because it's 2 turns than what Merlin provides on the freeze for 1 turn. So yeah, it's very odd. So the fire ability here on the skill 3 is just more damage amplification. The Frost Relic turns into this, attack gauge boosting, like, let's ramp up your damage dealer to just nuke for more of a PvP setting. And then the Storm Relic is abnormal status. So the skill 3 and skill 2 of all of these relics are such a big difference in skills, which I absolutely love. So that's why I wanted to kind of talk about them. All right, so let's discuss where best to use each individual relic. So I said at the beginning of the video, you're going to be using your Flame Relic the most just because it's kind of like a cheat code. If none of the bosses or waves that you're going up against have attack gauge reduction immunity. You find that by looking at the individual bosses, and you'll see it on their passive. So right here, Aldry has this attack gauge decrease immunity. If the boss does not have this, you're 100% using Morgan's Fire Relic. So in Plane of Beasts, Penveed does not have the attack gauge reduction. So you're going to be using Morgan's Flame Relic. And you're just going to spam that so Penveed never really ever takes a turn. You can utilize this with Sergius. I'll show you a quick little run here. So you can use, something like this with Sergius in his Fire Relic. You have Tristan in here for the attack speed, and he's just going to spam his skill 1. This is what you'll do. You'll have Morgan use her skill 2 to reduce the attack gauge of the boss. You'll have Sergius go in here, boost everybody with his attack gauge boost. You have Cormac as your damage dealer, and you have Tristan to slow down the boss and crack down his shield. But once the boss gets this first initial turn, you have Sergius pumping everybody. You have Tristan slowing everybody down, and then you have Morgan just going in and pushing back the attack gauge meter. And this is all because the boss himself does not have attack gauge reduction immunity. And this is all happening because of Morgan and her skill 2 that we went over on her Fire Relic. So there you go. That simple. He got that first turn, and then you just went in and you basically swept, right? Now, when it comes to Burning Land, you're never using Morgan in here. You really shouldn't, just because he is all based around DOT. He has tons of HP. It's not something that you're going to utilize. So for Aldry, I think most people know, but Aldry basically revolves around really high defense. You have the ability to go in there and inflict defense down on the boss, then things are going to get a whole lot easier for you. Whenever they have dual multipliers, that's something that kind of indicates that they might have some kind of self-buffing ability to increase their defense, and the boss does. So if they don't have defense increase 3, it charges their attack gauge. This activates some kind of ability. 100% chance to grant defense increase 3. All of those things. So you have two options here, actually. The Storm Relic is great for the main reason that you can you can inflict defense decrease 2 twice. And if you do that, the boss is going to hit a lot less hard, and you're going to be able to deal a lot more damage. On top of that, Morgan pairs very well with somebody like Accolon. Accolon has a great passive where whenever the hero is attacking a target that has defense decrease, you have a 100% chance to inflict recovery disruption that can't be resisted, and you're inflicting damage taken increase. So the nice thing is if you pair Morgan in her Storm Relic with Accolon, you don't really miss out on the increased damage taken that you would have from like the Frost Relic, because Accolon will end up putting it up. You can use the Frost Relic in this instance for a couple reasons. One, damage taken increase 2 is still a very good debuff. And on Morgan's passive, her second passive, she still has the ability to remove the defense decrease. So they're a little more interchangeable, but the thing is because Accolon really bases his passives around defense decrease, I think the Storm Relic wins out here just by a little bit. If you're not using Accolon and you're just going full damage, it depends. You know, I think there is some merit to the Frost Relic in that instance, but I think most high-end players use the Storm Relic, so I think the double defense decrease is a big thing. So I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to see what this double application ends up doing. So this is, all right, so that's one hit, but you can see here that the double hit of defense down actually activated on the left foot. So you have the ability to reduce the defense of the boss by 80% on her Storm Relic. And since he scales off of defense, this is probably why the Storm Relic wins out a little bit in Aldry. So yeah, here, that's probably where the Storm Relic wins. Now, when it comes to Shrine of Storms, same exact thing. He does not have attack gauge immunity disruption, just like Penveed, so you're just going to spam the skill 2 with Morgan, and he's never going to get a turn. When it comes to equipment dungeons, the Fortress of Arcellus, I had a video out not too long ago showcasing Morgan in her Flame Relic. Again, attack gauge reduction immunity. Not on there, guys. You're going to be using the Fire Relic. Origin of Ophelia. Now, I don't think you guys need to farm this stage just because it's not very good. However, this boss does have attack gauge immunity disruption. He also has the ability to switch debuffs, and he has a bunch of different like abnormal status immunities and things like that. He doesn't have a whole lot of self-buff, to my knowledge. It's just a lot of damage. So whichever ability I would say brings the most amount of damage, you'll kind of have to gauge this based on your other support heroes. So if you're bringing anybody else that has, decreased defense on their skill 1, then you're going to want to rotate in and out of Morgan either in her Frost Relic or her Storm Relic. I would probably say here that the Frost Relic is just a little bit better, even though you're not utilizing the buff removal. I think this ability right here can come in fairly clutch in this battle, because the boss does a little bit less damage if somebody has protection, and shield counts as a form of protection, which Morgan has on that skill 3 for the Frost Relic. So I think the Frost Relic edges out here a little bit, even though the Wind Relic is a positive element. Clan Raid, it's all the same bosses as we have mentioned in the power-up dungeon, so there's that. Favorite dungeon, For the Serpent's favor here, you're always using her Flame Relic just because the attack gauge reduction immunity is not a thing. And then in Sealed Temple, this is something where for Ceranos, so Ceranos' first stage, he does not have damage reduction immunity. Attack gauge reduction immunity. However, on the second stage, he does have attack gauge decrease immunity. So the main boss here does have that. However, his appendages do not. So if you never want his tendrils or his arms to attack you, you can bring the Flame Relic. If you're going for some type of speed run, it probably makes a little more sense for you to bring in the Frost Relic or the Storm Relic. Those are interchangeable most of the time. Now for Crom Crouch does not have attack gauge reduction immunity. So nowhere in here, so you are just spamming Morgan. And then in the Forbidden Dungeon, the name of the game in Forbidden Dungeon is just inflict a ton of abnormal status on your enemies, and you can win. Now, if you have enough damage and you have enough speed, you can certainly spam the typical Morgan and Sergius in his Flame Relic. So, yeah, either way, guys, all of her relics are absolutely amazing, and they're applicable in almost all content, which just goes to show that Morgan continues to be the GOAT when it comes to legendaries or just individual characters in the entire game. So I just thought it'd be a fun video, guys. I want to go over it. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you on the next one. See ya.